Very good.
Okay. If one some people, you know, I mean, they, you know, everybody can like it. It's a different kind of
Oh, fantastic. That's
to the Lehigh University Art Galleries and the Art and Architecture lecture. Today is a celebration, and because it's a celebration with the panel of new voices from the department, and because we are having our exhibit upstairs that later on you can spend some time looking at, I like to recognize the whole faculty of the department of the AM, and at the same time I want to give an applause to Tony Viscardi, who is actually, after quite a few years, you know, is stepping down as a chairman. And I want to also recognize Lucy Gans, who's going to be our new chair. Therefore, an applause for them. Now, I also would like to recognize our staff who work very closely with you in order to do that exhibit upstairs. Therefore, Mark, Jeff, Denise, all the people. Also, two very special persons, Nadia Friktensky, I can never pronounce her name, she killed me, Fristensky. Nadia, who actually worked in our catalog. And I'm going to make an announcement after 6 o'clock when we finish. You can go upstairs and get these. If you sign, you get it for free. This is especially, you are getting a $20 value catalog as a special celebration today. Okay? And I also like to recognize Denise, that she's saying to me, you forgot me, you know. Okay. Did everybody pay their taxes today? You know, because
those are the people that aren't here.
They are not here because they are worrying about that. Then I like to also make a couple announcements before we start our presentation of our speakers and also the theme that we're going to be talking about. We have a very nice exhibition across in the next building, you know what I mean, in the business building, we have a Margaret Burke White exhibit that is a precious exhibit. We are very fortunate to have that work many years ago. Margaret Burke White is a very well-known, after a World War II photographer. She worked for a Life magazine. But as a hobby, she loved to photograph insects. And she used to even carry yards with butterflies and a lot of different and she photographed that. And we happen to have a very precious collection, and it's really across the whole, you know what I mean, across. Also there is a Louis Bowles exhibit there. And I'd like to remind you that we also have an exhibit of our student Catherine Higgins at the UC, our gallery down there. Therefore, we also have some very interesting outsider work at McGuinness, Purvis Young, Howard Finster, and many other artists. I would love you to go and see that. Okay, now we're going to start. I would like to start introducing our new voices. And the reason of that is because everybody here have been in Lehigh 3 years or less. And let me start with a person who have been for 3 years here, who is Marilyn Jones. Marilyn Jones is assistant professor of graphic design, and she has a Master of Fine Art from Marywood University. Her bachelor is Fine Art from Syracuse, and she also has a Bachelor of Science from Kutztown University. She has worked before at several colleges, the College of New Jersey in Irvine, New Jersey, the King University, Middlesex County College in Edison, New Jersey, Sussex County College, Montclair University, Wyoming Seminary, and she, just to mention...
Just to say how old I am.
Not quite. Okay, then the second person that we are introducing is Nicholas Sawicki. Sawicki been here now for almost 2 years now. Yeah, a year and a half, right? Okay, and Nick is an assistant professor, and he is our art historian in the department. And he has a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, the Department of History of Art, and he got a BA from New York University. Prior to come to Lehigh, also he had not as many as Maryland, but he taught at the School of Art Institute in Chicago, art history, and also he worked at Grinnell College, and a teaching assistant also at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, our other speakers is Nick Olof. And Nikolai received the master's degree in architecture from Rice University and his bachelor degree in visual and performing art from Bennington College. Prior to coming to Lehigh, he taught at the School of Architecture at the University of Texas in Austin and ran his own private architectural firm. Nikolai has published several articles in journals. Last but not least, okay, we are having Hyun Tae Young, who is an assistant professor of architecture, and also this is your first year, Lehigh. He's completing his doctorate in history of art and theory of architecture from Columbia University, and has earned his master and bachelor degrees in architecture from the University of Seoul, South Korea. Before coming to Lehigh, he served as an assistant professor in the College of Architecture at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He has published numerous articles in both American and in South Korea journals. As a way of expediting the panel, I have 3 questions that we're going to be addressing. Each of them will address the question. My first question is, has the way we view art, architecture, design in academia changed? Let's go question by question. The floor is yours.
I'm going to just change the question a little bit, if that's okay.
Please, by all means. By all means, by all means.
Should the way art, architecture, and design be viewed differently? Because I think, we can ask the question, has it? Who knows? I mean, do we really know? But I think the question is, should it be looked at differently? And personally, I think so. We have a different world that we live in, and our world is not as comfortable as it used to be. We have bigger problems. And I think, part of what our faculty has agreed is that sort of the thread that runs through our art, architecture, and design is design. And as far as I can see, I think that design is about solving problems. And we have more problems. Our problems are bigger. We have global problems. And should it be viewed differently? Yes, we need to look at how our students, our faculty can view, how do we go about making some of these changes? Not that we can make all of them, but how do we prepare our students to enter the workforce, enter graduate school with a more problem-solving way of dealing with things? So I'm going to change it. He can change it back if he wants to, but that's basically how I look at it. I think we do need to look at it differently as a way to sort of spark creative thinking, design, what we call design thinking, to solve more problems.
Yeah, I mean, as a historian, I always like to turn the clock back, not forward. So I will return to Ricardo's original question and sort of build on 2 points that Marilyn made. First of all, over the course of the last 15 or 20 years, it's quite obvious that in the academy and in schools of art, artistic practice has come to be seen as something that has its own social obligations and responsibilities. That is a change that has been occurring gradually and building in the post-war era, and we can definitely talk about that as one of the signal changes of the last 15 or 20 years or so. One of the things that I feel like has changed a lot is that our expectations of what students are going to do after they finish their studies have changed. We're starting to look more pragmatically and in a more open-ended way at what kinds of possibilities there are out there after graduation, after the academy, in what we used to call the fine arts. We're no longer grooming students for a life of studio practice and gallery work. We're thinking about studio art, as it was once called, in a much more broad way. Architects and designers aren't being trained and groomed to be master builders in the sort of post-war or modernist model. Those kinds of things have changed. And I'm sort of an odd duck on this panel since I don't really have a studio-based practice. I don't make things. I'm a historian. I write about art and architecture and design. And my field has really changed. I feel tremendous changes, even in my time as from my time as an undergrad through graduate school through now. Art history, which some of us in the audience might have at one point known even as art appreciation, something that had its own canon and its own masterpieces and that sought to cultivate an appreciation for the finer things in life has changed radically. The things that we look at as art historians have changed. Our objects of study have changed. We no longer are interested simply in painting or sculpture or photography or traditional media, but art historians today are just as likely to be looking at and studying popular magazines and the moving picture and fashion and material and vernacular culture, and all of these things that never really made their way into the field. So that, for me, more acutely and more personally, has been the biggest change that I've felt.
It's hard to say if it has changed, but perhaps starting with a historical perspective, it's easier to be more optimistic than with a more realistic point of view, which makes me inevitably a little more pessimistic about should it, have it, has it, will it, ever. But the relationship between art, architecture, and design, and studio practice disciplines is not is not a new for a while, and there have been great movements that have generated the Art Deco, Art Nouveau, and of course in architecture, the Bauhausing movement is really steeped in the in the tradition of making. Of course, arts and crafts movement also. I'm not so sure how has that happened. How has that tradition carried over to the present times? Because is it because when I was in school it was easier to read about these movements? Mechanical heart. Or is it because now that I'm out of school and I try to be more proactive and try to practice what I have been told, I realize that there isn't really a movement that is clearly defined, and perhaps one thing that has changed is the paradigm from definition or discreteness of the disciplines to this dissolution of the boundaries of the lines between these things. So of course, in academia, it's always difficult or too easy for us to fall into the trap of relativity. Anything can go as long as you can steep it in historical tradition, or you can justify it. I don't know, experiential somehow. But that to me is alarming. So if anything has changed, is in me, I guess. I don't know if in school that has changed. Is our ability to communicate, simply because. That ability has to be based on a negotiated common ground, which is traditionally inherited. Usually comes with our education or with our cultural background, but cultural boundaries have dissolved, geographical boundaries have dissolved, and language as a means of communication has also dissolved. And Benjamin, or Walter Benjamin, also talked about, there are many problems inherent in the definition of what art, architecture, or what changes. But that, we wouldn't be here if we actually didn't revel in the hardship and we didn't like that, kind of to deal with that thing.
Okay.
Sorry for
No, it's perfect.
Like Paul, you were asking us like what kind of changes do we see, whether we believe in changes or like we're pushing
Well,
the changes.
as you know, the two following questions that I go to ask you, you can actually get into that. Basically, what I like to know, and I think a lot of people like to know, is have there been any changes, in art?
I'm kind of like among these four, I'm the extreme probably. I believe like the world is dramatically changing. And then architecture education is dramatically changing, the definition of architecture changing, technology changes as well. Probably in this context, I might appear as kind of extreme, but I think I know in the world, I'm not that extreme. Like for example, technology, we have the Edgerton here, beautiful, photos. And the author was he took photos, he was a scientist, right, MIT. He showed us different world, which we couldn't see in ordinary vision. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the first writers who used typewriters. And Friedrich Nietzsche wrote down, when he used typewriter, the kind of perception of the world in thinking, there was fundamental changes when he used different technology. This is not like pen anymore, not handwriting anymore, typewriter. Now we use computer. And using computer, it's a different kind of changes happening in our classroom and all over the world. How many parallel bonds you see in architecture studio. If you go to graduate program, it's pretty hard to find the parallel bonds. It's going away. Now replaced by computers. And computer creates a different kind of medium. And then, we have different situations. I have students, from foreign countries now, Lehigh, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, whether we had this many, students. I have a student from Bangladesh. This 18-student studio, one Bangladesh, one from El Salvador, and one from Guatemala, and then Peru, and one student who speaks Ukraine, and their teacher is Korean, and he came from Nebraska. This is the book.
Good answer.
And this kind of like a strange interaction in the world, what is happening now. The identity we had previously, the linear direction is melting down. Not everything melting down, going away. There is a kind of different system coming in. We are facing different transformation. So we are in the process of like redrawing everything, redefining everything. I mean, not like a fundamental revolution, but something strange is happening. So like the architectural education, yeah, dramatically changing. We should change, otherwise we will be left over. We become nostalgic. We're endlessly going back, talking about like, different things. We are facing an entirely different world now. So different technology, different people, different idea, and everything is somehow different. There is a scholar, Arjuna Padrai, he's from India, sociologist. He's vice president of a new school, university in New York City. He wrote 5 different scapes of what is happening in globalized world. First one, finance scape, money moves around. Idea scape, all different ideas moves around. Technology, iPad, probably Chinese people buying iPad, right? Koreans making long line to buy an iPad. Technology shared, right? And then idea moves around, people move around, everything moves around. So there are like different kind of activities happening. How can you assume architecture doesn't change in this world? Architecture is dramatically changing. Architecture is directly related to our life world, the world we're living. It changes our world, like our urban scape, our like everyday living scape, like a scape too. So we are in the middle. So I think like if architecture doesn't change, we have to make change. And I'm aware of that issue. I think it's but how far we can push it? A lot of like people argue like something fundamental doesn't change in life, right? We feel gravity. We still like use hands, arms, all those things. So I'm not sure. I'm about to cry. I have 2 classes this afternoon, so I talked too much this afternoon. So that's my answer.
Great. That is a
Some
good.
things never change.
That is a good answer. I was thinking to
Go through it.
have it through this, and then later on the floor is open. If you don't mind. As a matter of fact,
All right.
interesting enough, I got to starting with him the second question. That way we can go that way. The second question is, if design is ADD, architecture and design, common denominator, what is design to you? Or better yet, in our particular discipline, what is design now as we enter the second decade of the 21st century?
So
You go first.
either going first or I need water.
I will. We can get a water. Some. Let me see. Yeah. Right at the. Yeah. Thank you.
Buckminster Fuller actually had in the 60s. He went to this cruise trip with dog studies in Greece. There were a couple of like people, like Margaret Mead, anthropologist from Colombia, and then Marshall McLuhan, media theorist. They all get on the boat in Greece. So they talked about the future of humanity. Strange thing, like a scientist, architect, technology people, anthropologists, all got on the board. They talked about design. Design, what is design? I don't know, like it's, we, at school, we just more teaching like techniques.
I don't want you to die. Oh, they are bringing water. Yeah. There is water coming. It's water coming. There you are. Thank you guys. Thank you very much.
Sorry for complaining too much.
It's okay.
I think design is like, to me, it's not really about, the higher level of design is not like a product anymore, it's more like organizer. It's a network organizer. Probably like some young students here probably watched the movie Matrix, number 2. Key maker, right? And there is an architect. The architect of the machine, the system.
universe, yeah.
And in our society, generally, like it's not like designers, so-called design.
If you want any sweet, there you
It's
are.
not sweet, but they're bringing water. but
Okay,
that's-
well, we
that's
got,
something.
thank you.
Is this one? No, it's a water.
Okay.
In the case of like Bruce Mao recently, that he just published that book a couple of years ago, like Massive Change. He talked about not about like thing, individual thing. I design building, you design like graphic, you design something else. It's more like design fundamental is like relationship of things, not the thing itself, creating the relationship among things. So in our world, so like design is more about creating situation, creating like rearranging things in idea, metaphysical sense or physical sense as well. So we reshuffle them. And sometimes like pursuing efficiency, sometimes like we create rupture, pause, like stopping. So we are like, design is, to me, it's a network organizer.
Network organizer.
Yeah, designer is network organizer. I don't know.
No, that's really nicely put. Actually, well, there are two sides to that question. What would one think design is, and then how does that definition of design fit in with the perceived definition of design here at the AID?
That is exactly.
But picking up of HT's comment, there's this the Russian artist Shklovsky in the 30s defined art as not as matter and not as form and not as light, but as a relationship between them. And I think Maholi Nagy and his light shadow machine also picked up on that, in which it's not actually the object, but it's the relationship between its shape, the material it's made of, and the shadows and the lights that it casts. And to a large degree, this rings very true. Still, a former professor of mine from Bennington, Wes Heiss's current partner, Marek Wolczyk, he was here last semester. Actually, I remember back when I was an undergraduate, said that the new god of the universe is the database. Everything is a database, from the traffic lights to the GPS, to your email, to the way the intricate networks that create the clothes and the food is controlled by databases. Excel in a way is all pervasive. So I agree. A lot of what one does in the world seems to always fit in a much larger framework. So in essence, authorship has finally died, it seems like. It has dissolved in the kind of cloud of content out there. It's very early for me to comment on how do I think a view like that fits in with our department's mission. But something I have to believe that in the genetics of the making of this big soup that art, architecture, and design is, there is the belief that there's a common denominator. And that common denominator is the one that actually establishes the language and challenges us to move forward. To a large degree, again, to pick up, I would rather not dwell too much on definitions and be more propositional in nature, quoting an unlikely source. Actually, I probably will label myself the wrong way, but the federal copyright laws do not protect ideas. So you cannot copyright, you cannot claim ownership of an idea. So if we were to stake any kind of ambition here to be relevant, we have to kind of look beyond the horizon of ideas in discourse. We have to be propositional in nature. And that brings us to, the state of mind of making things. And I think our department has a very strong tradition and kind of hubbing around the shop, the CNC router, the laser cutter, the computer, the brush, the nude model, the etc. So I think there is a model that is not new, but I think it is unique, at least that I can think of among peer institutions. It's unique in really basing the disciplines in the foundation of the culture of making.
Yeah, I can really only speak about this from the perspective of an observer and a consumer, like most of us in the audience. I don't really fabricate anything, but as I did build a shelf at school. It seems to me that and maybe everyone else here on the panel can sort of pick up this thread, that much more attention is being paid these days by designers and producers to the end user and to the end use and to the nature of the consumer, and to design practice as a social contract with its own social obligations and responsibilities, from sustainability and leaving a small footprint to fabricating things that last, of materials that last or which can be reused. I mean, that seems to me to be a big cultural shift, not only within the institution and the profession, but from the side of audiences and consumers. People are demanding and driving the production of things that are more sustainable or better built, or aren't simply throwaways. Again, that's really from just an observer's perspective. I don't know to what degree that really is ingrained in the pedagogy of design, although from what I've seen in my work at an art school prior to coming here, it is very much becoming a part of the curriculum and the pedagogy. But that seems to be a pretty recent shift, and something that's really now starting to unfold. I don't think we've seen maybe just the tip of the iceberg here. I wonder how all of you think about that, you designers and makers of things.
What was the question again?
The question.
No, I know it.
Okay.
I come about it, from a little different angle, and in case you haven't noticed already, even though Ricardo had my long list of where I had taught, I came from 30 years of being in business as a graphic designer. And I know it's a long time, 30 years. But what I see in that change during that time was I started out being a designer that made things look good. My job was to organize information and to make it look pretty, make it look nice, just to produce nice materials. And as time went on, and probably more towards the end of the 30 years, my job became more to solve problems. And I did a lot of corporate work for like Lucent and Aventus, and my clients would come to me with a whole bunch of white paper, put it in front of me and say, this is our problem, what do we do about it? And I didn't know anything about their industry necessarily. But what I was able to do, and it was more about communication problems, was take a step back from what they were completely embedded in and come up with a solution to how they could solve that problem. So for me, design is about solving problems. And every industry, everyone has problems. And it's the people who can think differently, and I know that's the Apple, the Apple Buzz thing, think differently. But it's the people who can really take information, rearrange it in a new way, or a problem, rearrange it in a different way, and come up with a new solution. That's what design is. And that's what I think the evolution of it has become, and why it has become more important. I also think that as educators, it's our job to think differently about how we teach our students. And what Monte said about, things are changing, everything's moving. It's true in everywhere. What do we do with our classroom? We all sit in rows, we all sit in a confined classroom. We have a set course that we take that has a parameter, set time, has deadlines. Everything is very, very rigid. And I think that's one of the things as educators we're not looking at is we need to move more, and not just physically, but we need to have more people relating to one another, more people from outside our department looking at ours, our department looking at the problems in the business school or in marketing. I have a student, one of the wonderful things about being at Lehigh is I don't just have art students in my classroom. I have engineers, I have business people, I have architects, but I have one student, I don't know if she's here, Beth. I think she's civil, I don't know if she's civil engineering or mechanical engineering, but she's very active in engineers across borders. Is that what it's called? Across, and one of the things they're doing is going to South America, where there's a village, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of the village, where there's a problem with water, in that the water at the lower end in the valley of the homes is, is plentiful, but as you go up the hill, the water is, the water pressure is poor, and they don't have water at the top of the hill. And the problem is that the people at the lower part of the hill aren't turning their faucets off. So they're, they're dripping and running, and they're just pulling from the top of the mountain. And we started talking about it, and she says, it's terrible, we don't know what to do, it's a terrible problem, and she's talking about, different types of pumps and, whatever the mechanical things are to solve it. And I said, the problem is communication. You need to communicate to the people within the village what the problem is and what they can do to solve the problem. And she said, I never thought of it that way. That's what we need. So we're talking about getting graphic designers involved with the engineers in terms of finding out a way to improve the communication and to give more information. So I think that's what the university needs. And the problem with it is, it's not an easy thing to do. It's much easier to have, a course with a number, a course with credits, a course in a certain classroom, a course with a certain professor. It's, the logistics of it is so much easier to do it that way. But I'm not sure that's the way we should really be going about education anymore. And if anybody's familiar with IDEO and the way they operate on a T. And across the top of the T might be a sociologist. We were talking about the more human aspects of it. It might be an anthropologist, it might be a geologist, an engineer, a designer, a graphic designer, an architect. And they're all weighing in on the problem because they're all seeing it from different perspectives. The T part of it is maybe it's really an engineering problem, but those people don't have the expertise in engineering. So in order to get the depth of, the information that you need or the expertise, you have to go down and have somebody who really knows what they're doing in that particular area. So that's a wonderful model. And I think, again, logistics of it's very difficult, but I think we've got to start moving more. We've got to start getting people together and thinking and talking about how you can really figure out problems. And that's my goal. I mean, besides all the basics of graphic design, I'm trying to get students to realize that anybody can come up with ideas. Anybody can solve problems. You don't need to be an expert in it, but your mind has to work in a certain way, and you have to be able to see things a little bit differently. The cliche of thinking out of the box or whatever, but the expertise that you need in certain areas is very important. We all need to sort of build a better mousetrap. I mean, that's sort of, again, a cliche. But there was, something on Nova the other night about how they've built new telescopes, they're getting bigger and bigger and more sophisticated, and now found that infinity doesn't exist anymore. It's like, wait a minute, I spent years in science class, thinking that. But, the progression that we've made in technology and the changes that we keep making is because of design thinking. Somebody designed a better telescope. Talk about the better mousetrap. Somebody did it, and it has changed information, it has changed science, forever. So our students, whether they become graphic designers or architects or product designers, need to learn how to think and need to be able to look at information and turn it so that it becomes a better solution, a better idea. So for me, that's how my design field has changed. It's not just making things look good. It's coming up with solutions for communication, or just learning how to take your mind and have it be a little bit more fluid and move a little bit more and not be on a set path.
Well, I am very delighted to hear that, because that is, I know for a fact, many of us, we've been trying to do that for many years. I've been using the PBL method for 30 years, and I've been asked by an engineer, what is that? It's problem-based learning, comes from medicine. And basically, it's nothing else than teamwork. Because you see, very rarely you can work on your own. You've got the ideas, you germinate the ideas. Then if you are an artist in a studio, you might be alone. But if you are in any other kind of business, especially in museum, especially in art management, you don't do anything alone.
There's
It's a
very little.
teamwork. It's a totally
Right,
teamwork.
absolutely. There's very little that's done,
Yeah.
with just
Yeah.
individuals.
I would like to start with you this way now with the next question, and the next question is, we are all in academia because we have something to say as well as an intellectual need to learn and at the same time advance our profession, whether art, architecture, history, design, new technology, or the like. Is there something else that I have not mentioned in this question that you might want to explore?
I guess really just that, and going back to the idea of being in academia and our obligation to really get students to think and to explore new ideas. And one of my sort of selling points when when a new student comes, from high school about whether they should go to an art school or a design school or whether they should come to Lehigh, is that really it's about curiosity, it's about learning, different things, because yes, you can focus in on one thing, but at this point they really need to be sort of getting a broader base for what they can eventually apply to that. But I had a professor many years ago who said to me, a truly educated person is a self-educated person. And that's not a good thing, when we're in this business, because, why bother to come here? But I really think that one of the things we need to do is get our students to not wait for us to dish out the education to them, to be a little bit more proactive in their curiosity, and that a lot of, and especially when it comes to technology, and I know Nick has got this sort of dilemma of how to teach the technical aspects, because things have become so much more technical, is we don't want to spend our time doing that. This is not an institution, it's not a vo-tech school. What we need to do is find out how to get students to want to know more and to be more proactive about educating themselves. So I think, the curiosity and the intellectual part is how do we get students to want to learn without saying, I'll have students say to me, look this, I'll ask them to do thumbnails for their projects. And they'll go, well, how many do you want? Let's try 53. How does,
So tell me exactly.
so that mentality really needs to change. It's like, until you find a solution, okay? Might be 2, might be 200. But I think, our obligation is to make students see that, they're not here to get, 90 credits? They're here to really explore, they're really here to learn as much as they can in different areas, but also to really, explore the curiosity and educate themselves. Once they find that little path and then they go off on a side path, it is not about how many thumbnails do I do. It's, until you find the best solution. I say to them, they'll show me their thumbnails and they go, all right, now turn the page. Forget those ideas. Start with new ones. Turn the page. So it's not the good enough club, it's trying to find that best solution. And going back to the collaboration, that is just, so many of my students, the light goes on in their head when we sit around and talk about it in a group, because they've got an idea for somebody else's. It's like easier sometimes to weigh in on somebody else's idea than on your own, and the ideas just grow with input from other people. So I would definitely say that that's what we need to do: foster creativity, foster inspiration, and and realize that a truly educated person is a self-educated person.
Yeah, and that's, that kind of learning environment is already being put into practice in so many art schools and art programs on the undergraduate level and the graduate level. What I sort of feel like is that at times we're swimming against the tide, because the nature of education and the nature of learning in this country before the undergraduate education is rigid, it's hierarchical, it's linear, it doesn't make room and allowances for this kind of problem solving, for self-directed work. And it is, above all, with rare exceptions, not concerned with images or visual culture or making. That's one of the really interesting things that I think some of us encounter. I can really only speak for myself, but I gather that many of us are seeing this, is one of the things that we are dealing with on a broader level inside the academy and undergraduate institutions, is sort of introducing students to ways of thinking and learning that they haven't encountered before. It's been said for 150 years. Walter Benjamin, who Nick mentioned a little bit earlier, said this. Charles Baudelaire said this in the mid-19th century. The world is increasingly visual, and ever more so today. And I think we're starting to recognize that in the academy. I'm not so sure that is being really recognized and put into practice in elementary schools, on a secondary school level. And so students come into an education in studio practice or art history without, in many cases, having had much exposure to the art world, or to visiting museums, or to talking about pictures, or talking about buildings. And that is really the exception to the rule. It's a gift, it's a rare thing if you've grown up going to museums or taking courses in your high school or your elementary school in drawing or painting or photography. So much of the American school system really doesn't make room for that kind of an education. I don't really know what I'm trying to say with this, only that there's a gap that I'm feeling more and more the longer I teach, that there's a gap between secondary school and elementary school education with relationship to art and architecture and design and art history, and what we're trying to do here.
No, absolutely. I actually, that dilemma, that question has stayed with me as long as I remember going to school, because I just didn't go to school in the so-called in America. So I come from a tradition of, I don't know if I can identify myself. I've been here for about more than 10 or 12 years now, so I don't know if I come from that tradition. But I did a big part of my schooling in the spirit of quantitative performance and the hard sciences, including art was a hard science. There are rights and wrongs. There are right ways of drawing and right ways of painting. There's a skill and a trade, and there's, so it's a conflict, because I think we have to be, or at least I, for myself, I'm very careful when I open up the doors to exploration. Because many, the rigor of research and exploration is hard to acquire. And it's something that comes with lots of trials and errors, but comes with learning. And, you can learn it, that can be taught to a degree. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be teaching. That rigor can be taught. And there's a culture of learning that one is additive. It's not something that comes to you one day. It's not an inspiration-driven wisdom that comes. So hence the problem. How can we invite happenstance, and how can we invite serendipity in a process that other disciplines have been way more successful than artists or architects are or have been? How can we, namely basic research? And I hate to say that, but culture for many years now, for a good part of the 20th century, and it's scary to think that we're in the second decade of the 21st century. But other disciplines have, a culture doesn't places value in solutions, problems, but also in actual value that's, commodity, period. And I don't think school should be about that. In fact, I think it's detrimental for us to be occupied with creating commodity, at least that early in the education, sophomore and junior years. So for me, the biggest problem here is how do we cultivate the true spirit of undergraduate research? And how do we ask a simple question that requires a complex answer? Because at this point, I'm really not that curious about finding a solution, more asking more questions than that. The question is fantastic. A good question that you don't know the answer to is what keeps me on the
I thought the question was about me initially. I'm interested in learning some money-making skills. As an extra, I'm interested in sociology, anthropology, and economics. Speaking of the academia in general, in continuation of this conversation, my teaching philosophy, I told students, I explained a couple of times, it's creating some kind of organized chaos. I don't control student individuals, I control the situation. Not really control, allowing students to interact randomly. This is traditional education was more like there is a master. And Professor Bruce Thomas and I had a conversation this morning about Frank Lloyd Wright, right? He thought he was a genius, right? And the rest of them mob. So he wrote the book, Genius and the Mob. And professional organization is basically mob. He mentioned that. And then lots of architecture education or art education is based on that model. We have a master and disciples. So I thought that that's not going to work. Oh, I'm not a master. It doesn't work, right? I can't teach like a master anymore. Studio, I'm teaching studio, and now I'm teaching also history. So I have this tendency of theorization. I'm thinking a lot, and I realized I'm not a master, and I see I haven't seen many masters in life. So how can I teach a student? Okay, they're not so interested. So let's think this way, creating some kind of different network system. Is each student teaching each other. So I told one time, my dream is sitting back and reading New York Times, students discussing and solving all the problems, they're working hard, figuring out what to do. So my real key is not really, and giving answer one by one. In a history class, I answer questions, I teach, I point out what is important, what's not, and what things they should remember. But in a studio, it's random, but they spend much more time in studio by themselves. They spend 3 times more time by themselves than with me. In studio, it's twice per week, so 6 hours per week, and they spend probably 30, 40 hours in a week. Yeah, some of them. So I think, how can I create this kind of traditional collaboration? Lots of new firms, architecture firms in the world, actually started by colleagues, friends, who work together at school, or sometimes they met in a professional world. So, what I can do is teaching them one side, I have database of contemporary architecture. I give some references all the time, but I don't give them answer. I ask them to try, and I ask them to multiple options always, and I ask them to talk to their friends again. And then my job is taking them, on Sunday I take 10 students to Highline, New York City, and that's one opportunity. So they will see, and then after that I told them they should go whatever they want to go, and spend the whole afternoon coming back, and then they will spread what they learned there, and then they will talk to each other. So it's more not really teaching one by one. I don't have that time. I only have a 6-hour meeting time. So I can't have really impact. So I thought, what if I control this system? So I push one button, it's all connected together. It's kind of strange network system, right? Machine, but we are not machine, but we're much more creative. So if we create this kind of different network, one interest will come in and it will spread up. So when you have the studio, then like some kind of community project, we start. And then if students get excited, they got into this thing, and then they will find their own solution, right? So I will guide general kind of direction, not really teaching one by one. So, this is what I think. It's more it's hard to explain, but it's more interaction based, and then more a meeting with them, not about specific discipline. It's more focusing more time on the relations. Thinking about need to understand much more about students. If sometimes I feel I regret because I know too much about individual students. So one student there, she has 7 siblings. That kind of thing. That's a little too much to know.
Guys down there, the team, we are actually a team. That is how we work here. Therefore, we facilitate,
Thanks a lot.
Do you have any questions for any one of us? Or? Any of the panelists?
Nice.
Who?
Looks like there's a question over there.
Okay.
I was very interested by your panel, but I think I should bring in a little bit of reality. I mean, we have 10% unemployment in this country. What do you think those students whom you have taught to think, and that's what we all do, and maybe create and so on and so forth, are going to do to get a worthwhile position when they graduate from Lehigh? It does, none of you, as far as I know, have mentioned that little part. And that's really extremely important to everybody.
There was no question, so that's why we didn't answer it.
However, let me say that about many years ago, I had a son in arts and architecture, and he rarely never landed a decent job. And the economy was a little bit better. So I'm afraid that that is going to be the fate of many of the students, unless something extraordinary happens and you tell them to get maybe a minor in computer science.
Yeah, but your question, is based on the fact, on the assumption that what starts here changes the marketplace.
No, but it should consider the market.
Or should you respond to it?
No, I meet like students a lot, and I talk about like market situation. One thing, we don't control market. Market control us normally. Like the world, like market, global capitalism creates a situation for us. But we are normally victims, so we need to figure out how to survive. I agree. We need to train students to be somehow like more competitive in the market. They need to figure out how to survive. Yeah, well, that's an important part of our, our thing we need to do. Yeah, I totally agree. But the discussion we're doing is also a way of doing it better too. So I think like the market situation creates a lot of troubles, but that doesn't mean we need to stop what we do. We need to reinforce it and make them better prepared. So personally, I tell my students always, they have multiple options. Like this is like a difficult situation, 10% unemployment rate. So what can they do? There is a job, like a lot of layoff right now in the architectural market, right? In New York Times, like a Skidmore, Mail, KPF, like lay off 100 people one day and 80 people. But, there are certain ways, like survival is quite important. So I think like it's not just architecture students, it's all over like the world, right?
It's work.
Yeah, it's a word, but the only way we can do is like, becoming more competitive and then, better prepared. And then having multiple options, not really like, just this is my life, just get it done that way. We just need to teach a student about reality as well. I think I totally agree with you. That's like a really scary thing. I'm scared because like I don't want to see my students just having no job for multiple years, like sitting at home, becoming burden to your parents. That doesn't make sense. I have a kid, I worry about that. But she is 7 years old, so she's fine, I have some time. But, I agree with you. That's an important issue.
The other thing to just sort of remember in kind of thinking about this in a big picture way is that for many of our students, this degree at Lehigh is one of 2 or 3 or several. I mean, that's something that's really changed. And I gather that most of our students who would want to go into a profession such as architecture in particular would be going on to advanced training. And what I mean by saying that is that all of our undergraduates at Lehigh are considering, or at least considering, further education in some specialized field. And that kind of a question is really, I think, really relevant for graduate programs.
That's a cop-out.
Well, no, it's not. It's not a cop-out.
Absolutely.
But I wonder whether,
But technically speaking, a Lehigh graduate from the pre-architecture program, pre-professional architecture program, cannot practice architecture. That student can be hired as a draftsperson,
Well, it's already.
as a model maker, and we offer an excellent education in model making and drafting and drawing. There is a strong tradition, I'm new, it's my second semester here, but just looking around, the tradition of attention to detail is exceptional. I believe, I would have to hope that that will put them over the edge. Will that secure them a job? Not, but they will be more competitive. But if they want to be architects, they have to go. I mean, they have to go on to higher.
Yeah, I was thinking of you, Tony.
I would like to ask you this question, which will address hers. Everybody's mentioned how things are changing really fast. So if we were to train someone to be a great draftsperson, in 5 years they're no longer drafting.
Exactly.
So they lose that job. If we train someone to be really great at a computer, in 5 years there will be no more computers. So what we're trying to teach them, in a way, is divergent thinking. A way of saying that there's many ways to solve a problem, because those ways are constantly changing with the evolution of culture and society. If in the training I have, it was a reaction to the Bauhaus, and the Bauhaus was a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, we're now in an age where we're reacting to the information age, and we're just barely grabbing the speed of information, because the speed of transfer of information is so fast now that we don't know anymore what is real and what is fabricated. We don't know anymore what is physical and what is a virtual representation of the physical. So it's important in an undergraduate education, particularly in our program, which is within the College of Arts and Sciences, that we're really training a person to be a human being and asking them to understand the art of living in society and having the ability, the agility, to think on their feet. Because things change so drastically that if we were a trade school and we said, okay, we're going to teach you AutoCAD, when we hired Nick, he said, AutoCAD looks like the end, in the middle of the 20th century. I mean, let's jump into the 21st century. And again, I'm barely capable of doing that stuff. But I know what I am capable of, is I'm capable of generating wonder, curiosity, problem solving, and most importantly, divergent thinking. Because divergent thinking is the one thing they drum out of kids in high school. They say there's one answer to a problem. And we all know that's not true. There's many problems, many solutions to a problem. And usually every time you ask a question, there's not really a great answer. There's just a better question, because it keeps, everything is moving so fast that I would like you all to react to the impact of social networking, the frequency of bits of information. How deep do we really get into a piece of information, and does that affect the level that our students are willing to dig? Because it seems like in the last 5 or 6 years, I've noticed that students are less patient with digging deeper into a question. They would much rather have many answers rather than having one really good answer. And I would like to get your reaction to it, because most of you are much younger than I am, and you've had to deal with this kind of multifarious need for constant input, but none of it seems to go too deep. And how do we get a student to really go deep? And to realize that the beauty of education is actually it's unveiling the world, and that's what we're trying to do, is unveil the world to people. When we went to outer space, we said, wow, we're seeing the world from so far away, and it changed everything. Marshall McLuhan, the Ames people that went, they really talked about a whole other thing. And now we can look really close. So we can see molecular structure, we can see biology. All of a sudden, nature is now a whole new discipline to us. When I look at the work that Hante does in his studio and stuff that I do, it really deals with growth and biological metamorphosis. That didn't exist 20 years ago, because only the privileged were allowed to look at the makeup of a molecule. Now when we look at the makeup of a molecule or the sprouting of the seed, it becomes an analogical study for us. So there's so much information to give to a student. To just train them to get a job, to me, would be a disservice. I'm trying to train them to be a human in society that will affect our overall culture. And because I know the job market will change, like Hante says, it changes so fast that if we train a person to do one thing, they'll have a job for 5 years, and then they'll be left. We have an interjection.
I'm sure we will.
I mean, I don't want to say too much, but you can do both. You can be both highly educated and even an artist, and still have an income and some kind of a job. Believe me, it's much more fun.
Absolutely. I agree.
And actually, you
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I mean, they're not.
And
I
I
mean, if
think a faculty is very protected from the problems of the job market. I know that very well.
Well, I
think it's your responsibility.
I have to disagree because tomorrow we have 21 students going to the Thinking Creatively conference at Kane University where they will be networking. They're going to be going into New York and attending and networking with different professionals. Several of them will be showing their portfolios, which is, has one objective, and that's to try and get art directors and designers that are hiring to notice them. We are also, several of them are participating in a charrette with a diverse combination of university students to solve problems. So they're very career-minded. We can't guarantee, there's no guarantee in this world about anyone getting a job, but we are career-focused. Just because we didn't talk about it doesn't mean that we're not.
well, even when
Yeah.
Ante says the market
Let's-
controls us,
Let's see if we
as
got
academia, we can affect the market. Educational institutes affect the trade market.
Let's see if we got another question because we are kind of yes.
With sort of a follow-up on technology, with as fast as technology is changing, so much more than ever, than anyone can imagine. Any thoughts from any of you about how art might inform us to deal with it better, might inform the world on the topic of the speed at which and how it's way ahead of all of us?
My comment about together, it's Tony described, everything changes. So I think first of all, when you think about these changes, it's not a change every day. You don't recognize what is happening tomorrow. It's more structural. So in Bauhaus, modern period actually conquered probably 80 years, right? It was built and then it's just going away now. So different kind of structure will come in. It's not every 2 years or 3 years, it will be entirely different. AutoCAD is a useful tool for next 5 years. I don't worry about that. And that's one, when you think about technology, it's not changing dramatically. Also older generation, I feel yesterday we had a speaker, Ken Butler, an artist, really interesting. He make just found object and make it into music instrument. The trouble is I think I'm middle generation, so or senior generation, older generation, and then younger generation. They might not have this kind of problem. We think young students, they're generation of ADHD in general, right? That they are so distracted, they're pursuing not depth, width, all these things. They're using iPad all the time. But we shouldn't be just judgmental. That's different generation. They have their own system of thinking and walking, right? We use, when you go to different city, we feel a city looks so unfamiliar. We feel the city is big, but after living a couple of months, you feel the city is tiny actually, right? Technology is something similar. Students might feel much more comfortable with the technology. They can operate things. It's not really dramatic change, everything just going away. They might feel comfortable with that. So also a question of depth. Depth is coming from a little pushing, right? I ask a student to think more, but that's fine. But sometimes we push students to a certain direction. It's a little suppression, depth. But what if they don't care about depth? Or what if they have different system of operation? How can you ask them to follow only us? What if they work differently and creating much more depth and much wider width as well? So it's not really judgmental. Understanding the system, it's not traditional system is more everybody just becoming specialist in certain things, getting deeper and deeper. I don't think it's possible anymore. So it's total network, internet, phone, how many times students are normally they're totally addicted to this networking. iPod, phone, the text messaging, and then Facebook, everything. their lifestyle, that doesn't mean they don't meet friends, they meet more people, right? It's kind of intense interaction is happening. It creates different lifestyle, different modus vivendi now, like it's coming up. Our job is not really like preventing them, that's not possible. We can't force them to go different direction. We gotta understand, we need to like guide this general direction, like to make it more creative, more productive.
I would like to have another question, that way we can, yes. Go ahead.
Okay. I have a question about what's actually right in front of our faces, or it's actually not, it's upstairs. And it's kind of an interesting one because you four are the newest faculty here at Lehigh, and so you had the least time to maybe adjust to the environment that's here. However, you were tasked with the challenge of producing something for a faculty show. For some of you, it was maybe more natural for the work that you already do. For some of you, Nick Zawicki in particular, who does not ordinarily make things, it was outside of his comfort zone. I'm curious how you arrived at the decisions you did in making something for this show, and how it might relate to the students. In other words, how what you're showing to us, the community at Lehigh, actually bears some fruits that you hope will get passed on to the students, the faculty, University at large, and the community beyond.
Good question.
Well, I'll start this For me, it was an interesting dilemma because most of my work has had to be based on client needs. You know, I haven't had a lot of liberty to explore areas that I want to explore because I have very specific, detailed information about what I have to produce. So it was a little liberating, but also a little scary because I didn't have those things, and I actually like parameters. It makes me work better. So, it's easier to flounder when you don't have those things. So what I really wanted to do was just explore some more or less intuitive work because I don't get much chance to do that. And it was just, and also to make mistakes if I wanted to because mistakes in the real world are actually very costly and you're not allowed to do that. So it was an experimental type of process for me. I can't say that it's something that I will continue, doing for years and years. I think it was just basically an intuitive exercise, and also something that I think is important for design thinking is to allow intuition to take over sometimes. Now, intuition can cause problems because it's not always correct, but I think the more we exercise intuition and just general free creativity, the easier it will be for us to design for problems.
That's good.
So my piece upstairs is a bookshelf and a stool that I constructed and a set of books, maybe 20 or 25 books and magazines and catalogs from my bookshelf in my office over at Chandler. The books are a selection of text mostly on 20th century work. It's one of the courses that I teach here. I teach a 20th century art course. I've spent more of my time writing about art or curating exhibitions or researching exhibitions than actually taking part in them. I don't really fabricate things, so this piece or this participation, as Wes said, is somewhat out of my comfort zone. But I felt that I wanted to somehow take part in this show. I guess it also wasn't an option because Ricardo was twisting my arm. But I wanted to take part in the show kind of on my own terms and doing something that tied into my practice, which is really teaching and writing and talking about art. And so I put together this little library, or this little excerpt from my library, into the exhibition space, hoping that for the user, for the audience, or for students who take my classes and wander in and see that piece, there might be a different set of stories about 20th century art that they could come across. I mean, no matter how much you try not to do it, you end up teaching histories or stories or practices that end up being in their own way somehow quite canonical. And you get ensconced in your own ways, You have to make decisions about the kinds of things you're going to teach, what you're going to leave in and what you're going to leave out. There's a triage that happens there. That's, you know, the dirty and not so secret about teaching, is that we all end up telling pieces of stories. And I struggle with that with teaching. I always wish I could include more or offer more of an open-ended kind of format or more open-ended access for students. And I guess this was partly an attempt to negotiate that dilemma. I also feel quite strongly that just from curatorial practice and from working on exhibitions, that the space of the exhibition or an exhibition should somehow be active and participatory, and that you shouldn't just stand in front of a piece of art or a project and look at it. You should engage in it in some way, and so somehow this engagement is made literal in that piece, in that I'm sort of inviting you to take a book off the shelf and browse through it and you know, deal with the stuff that's there physically and spend time in front of it. And I mean, that's not a new concept by any means, but it's something that I think is important in the context of an exhibition or a museum. We tend to think of these institutions as sacred, ritualized spaces. Sometimes it's nice to sort of shake them up and to turn the audience member into a participant.
It's perfectly said. And the question is a tough one, because not knowing what all of my colleagues, any of my colleagues were putting up, it was hard to think of what the venue would be. So I really, I have to say that the piece I have upstairs is not really conceived as, you know, a means of commenting on us as a group, or in any means as a critique on the medium of exhibiting. For me, it's as simple as showing a benchmark in my process. It's a still from a design project that I'm working on. It's a competition, and for me, coming out of architectural practice, all of my teaching is informed in a reality of buildings, and as complex or as simple as they can be. And the piece upstairs is simply the stage in the process at which the form making or form finding in architecture tries to transcend the pure kind of quantitative performative criteria of construction. Building, and it's steeped in the tradition, or at least the practice of digital design, when software has enabled us to make incredibly novel and complex geometries, which are very difficult to translate into the world of actual real materials and structures. So the piece upstairs explores, at least tries to start the conversation that I'm having with my students about what are the cultural implications of novel geometries.
In my case, there were a couple of conditions. In the beginning, I thought having too many kids at home, so I shouldn't spend too much money. That's the first condition. Second, like I want to use this one kind of like opportunity to work with the students. I want to teach the students like what I do in the studio. It should be continuation of that part. So I asked a couple of students to work with me. So Brian Monetti actually worked with me to the end. And I asked a couple of other students, they didn't want to be part of this labor-intensive work. But actually, I thought like I taught the studio, so it can be like continuation. Also, when they applied for graduate school, I mentioned them as a collaborator. From the beginning, I told them, okay, you can get all the credit with me. I'm not so interested in credit, so I told them, you can take it as a collaborator, you can take your credit. So you use for your like career starting point of like you being an architect or designer. I don't have any problem, just we work together. And then the third one is as using technology at Lehigh. So I came here last year, so I wanted to use technology, like, you know, I wanted to figure out what kind of technology machines at Lehigh has. So So like this time I used like a water jet, like which is part of like this mechanical engineering. So water jet cuts metal, so that's why aluminum came in. So that's the three conditions: budget, and collaboration with the students, and then technology at campus. But while working on that, we just changed. I had a meeting with it so many times with the students and figure out. But my idea was like I written it down. It's more like stabilizing some kind of conceptual, traditional concept of wall. So like representing some kind of different digital, technology. But turned out to be really, really labor intensive. So it was totally the opposite.
That is a great piece.
It was like a very good learning experience this time.
Very good.
I had to hire a couple like slave workers there, like, just cutting pieces for hours. I felt so sorry.
Well, thank you. This is a great ending. I would like to again mention that we have some photos there. Also, you can go sign and get a catalog for yourself. And thank you very much for celebrating with us.
Good job, Alex.